The Portrait in the Tower. Chapter 1. The Stranger's Arrival. The autumn wind howled through the skeletal branches of the oak trees that lined the cobblestone path to Ravenshollow Manor, carrying with it the scent of decay and the promise of winter's harsh embrace. Dr. Edmund Blackthorne pulled his wool coat tighter around his shoulders as his carriage lurched through another pothole, the wheels grinding against stone worn smooth by centuries of use. Through the rain-streaked window, he caught his first glimpse of the estate that would serve as his sanctuary, or perhaps his prison, for the months to come. The manor rose from the mist like a Gothic cathedral, all pointed spires and towering buttresses, its windows dark and watching, gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their stone faces twisted into expressions of eternal anguish, while ivy crept up the walls like grasping fingers. It was exactly the sort of place where a man might lose himself in his work, away from the prying eyes of London society and the whispered accusations that had driven him from his practice. Edmund had come to Ravenshollow at the invitation of Lord Aldrich Grimm, a reclusive nobleman whose correspondence had spoken of a private library containing rare medical texts and anatomical studies. The prospect of such resources, combined with the generous stipend offered, had been too tempting to refuse. Besides, after the scandal that had ruined his reputation, the accusations of grave robbing, the whispers of unholy experiments, he had little choice but to seek refuge in the countryside. The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, a massive wooden door adorned with iron hinges that had turned black with age. Edmund gathered his belongings and stepped out into the driving rain, his boots splashing in puddles that reflected the pale light of the oil lamps flanking the door. Before he could raise the brass knocker, the door swung open with a prolonged creak that seemed to echo through the surrounding countryside. "Dr. Blackthorne, I presume?" The voice belonged to a tall, gaunt man dressed in the black livery of a butler. His face was pale and angular, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "I am Cornelius, Lord Grimm's manservant. His lordship is expecting you." Edmund nodded, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Indeed. I trust the journey's end finds me in good time." "His lordship keeps irregular hours," Cornelius replied, stepping aside to allow Edmund entrance. "But he is most eager to make your acquaintance. Please allow me to see you to your chambers. Dinner will be served at your convenience." The interior of Ravenshollow Manor was even more imposing than its exterior. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its banister carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering candlelight. Portraits lined the walls, generations of grim ancestors staring down with eyes that followed Edmund's movement across the checkered marble floor. Cornelius led him up the staircase, their footsteps muffled by a deep crimson carpet that had seen better decades. The walls were adorned with more portraits, their subjects growing progressively more recent as they climbed. Edmund noticed that many of the faces bore a striking resemblance to one another. The same sharp cheekbones, the same piercing eyes, the same cruel curve to the lips. "The Grimm family has occupied this estate for over 4 centuries, Cornelius explained, noticing Edmund's interest in the portraits. "They have always been devoted to their lineage." Edmund's chambers were located in the east wing, a spacious suite consisting of a bedroom, sitting room, and a small study that overlooked the manor's grounds. The furniture was antique but well-maintained, and a fire had been laid in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Rain continued to lash against the windows, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the gardens below. "Lord Grimm will see you in his study at 10 o'clock, Cornelius informed him as he set Edmund's trunk at the foot of the bed. "Until then, you are free to explore the manor. The library is located in the north wing, though I should warn you that certain sections are restricted." After Cornelius had departed, Edmund unpacked his belongings and changed into dry clothes. The events of recent months weighed heavily upon his mind. The accusations, the trial, the loss of his medical license. The supposed evidence against him had been circumstantial at best, but the court of public opinion had been swift in its judgment. Dr. Edmund Blackthorne, once celebrated for his pioneering work in anatomy and surgery, had become a pariah overnight. The truth was far more complex than the newspapers had reported. Yes, he had conducted experiments on cadavers, but always with the noble goal of advancing medical science. The bodies had been procured through legal channels, mostly, and if he had occasionally bent the rules in the pursuit of knowledge, was that not a small price to pay for discoveries that could save countless lives? But such distinctions mattered little now. His reputation was in ruins, his practice closed, and his colleagues had turned their backs on him. Only Lord Grimm had extended an invitation, offering him the chance to continue his research in privacy. For that opportunity, Edmund was prepared to overlook the eccentricities of his host, and Ravenshollow Manor certainly seemed to harbor more than its share of peculiarities. As evening fell, Edmund made his way to the north wing in search of the library. The corridors were dimly lit by oil lamps that cast long shadows on the walls, and he found himself grateful for the sound of his own footsteps, which provided some relief from the oppressive silence that seemed to permeate the manor. Occasionally, he heard other sounds, the settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through hidden passages, and once, what might have been the distant sound of weeping. The library was a magnificent chamber that stretched 2 stories high, its walls lined with countless volumes bound in leather that had darkened with age. Rolling ladders provided access to the upper shelves, while reading tables positioned throughout the room were illuminated by brass lamps. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and binding glue, a perfume that never failed to stir Edmund's scholarly instincts. He was examining a particularly rare anatomical text when he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, he expected to see Cornelius or perhaps Lord Grimm himself, but instead found himself face to face with the most beautiful woman he had ever encountered. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight and hair as black as a moonless night. Her dress was elegant but simple, cut in a style that seemed both timeless and slightly out of place. But it was her eyes that truly captivated him. Deep violet pools that seemed to hold depths of sorrow and wisdom far beyond her apparent years. "Forgive me," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Edmund could not quite place. "I did not mean to startle you. I am Lilith Grimm, Lord Grimm's daughter." Edmund set down the book and offered a slight bow. "Dr. Edmund Blackthorne at your service. Your father has graciously offered me the use of his library for my research." A shadow passed across her features at the mention of her father, but it was gone so quickly that Edmund might have imagined it. "You are most welcome, Dr. Blackthorne. I hope you will find what you seek among these dusty tomes. Though I wonder—" She paused, her gaze studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "What exactly is the nature of your research?" "Medical studies, primarily anatomy and physiology. I am particularly interested in the mechanisms of life and death, the boundary between the 2 states, if you will." Something flickered in her violet eyes at his words, something that might have been interest or perhaps recognition. How fascinating! Death is indeed a mystery that has puzzled mankind since the dawn of consciousness. Some would say it is the final frontier of human knowledge. And yet, Edmund found himself saying, drawn into conversation by her evident intelligence, death may not be as final as we suppose. There are accounts throughout history of individuals who have returned from the brink, who have crossed that threshold and somehow found their way back. If we could understand the mechanism, you could defeat death itself, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Such knowledge has been sought by many, Dr. Blackthorne. The question is whether mankind is wise enough to wield such power. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Cornelius, who seemed to materialize from the shadows like a specter. "Miss Lilith, your father requests your presence in his study. Dr. Blackthorne, Lord Grimm is ready to receive you as well." As they walked through the corridors toward Lord Grimm's study, Edmund found himself stealing glances at Lilith. There was something indefinably otherworldly about her, as if she existed slightly apart from the mundane reality that surrounded them. Her footsteps made no sound on the carpeted floor, and when they passed beneath the oil lamps, her shadow seemed strangely indistinct. Lord Aldrich Grimm's study was a chamber that spoke of power and ancient knowledge. The walls were lined with books in multiple languages, while glass cases displayed curious artifacts, bones carved with strange symbols, crystals that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, and objects whose purpose Edmund could not even guess. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with papers and charts that appeared to map astronomical phenomena. Lord Grimm himself was a man of perhaps 60 years, though his exact age was difficult to determine. His hair was silver white and swept back from a high forehead, while his eyes were the same striking violet as his daughter's. He was tall and lean, dressed in a black suit that emphasized his aristocratic bearing. When he smiled in greeting, Edmund noticed that his canine teeth were unusually sharp and prominent. "Dr. Blackthorne, welcome to Raven's Hollow," Lord Grimm said, rising from behind his desk and extending a hand that was surprisingly cold to the touch. "I trust your journey was not too arduous." "Not at all, my lord. I am grateful for your hospitality and the opportunity to pursue my research in such splendid surroundings." "Excellent. I have read your published papers with great interest, Doctor. Your theories on the reanimation of deceased tissue are quite innovative. Tell me, have you made any practical progress in that direction?" Edmund hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his more controversial experiments. "I have made certain observations that suggest the possibility of restoring vital functions to recently deceased subjects, though the results have been inconsistent." Lord Grimm's eyes gleamed with an intensity that made Edmund uncomfortable. "Inconsistent, perhaps, but promising nonetheless. You see, Doctor, my family has long been interested in similar pursuits. We have resources at our disposal that might prove useful to your research: specimens, equipment, and most importantly, knowledge that has been accumulated over many generations." "What sort of knowledge?" Edmund asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "Ancient texts that predate modern medicine by centuries, yet contain insights that contemporary science is only beginning to rediscover. Techniques for preserving tissue, methods of stimulating dormant cellular activity, and yes, procedures for restoring life to the recently dead." Edmund felt his pulse quicken. If such knowledge truly existed, it could revolutionize medical science. But there was something in Lord Grimm's manner that suggested his interests might not be purely academic. "I would be honored to examine such materials," Edmund said carefully, "though I hope you understand that my approach is strictly scientific. I have no interest in supernatural or occult practices." Lord Grimm chuckled, a sound like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. "Of course, Doctor. Science and superstition often walk hand in hand until wisdom learns to separate them. What the ancients attributed to magic, we now understand as natural phenomena that simply operate according to laws we have yet to fully comprehend." Lilith, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Father, perhaps Dr. Blackthorne would benefit from seeing the collection before discussing its application." "Quite right, my dear. Dr. Blackthorne, I propose that you spend the next few days familiarizing yourself with our library. When you feel ready, I will show you materials that are, shall we say, not available to the general scholarly community." As the evening wound to a close, Edmund found himself walking back to his chambers alongside Lilith. The corridors seemed even more shadowy than before, and he was grateful for her company, though her presence raised as many questions as it answered. "Your father seems to be a man of unusual interests," he ventured as they paused outside his door. "My father is a man who has dedicated his life to understanding the mysteries of existence," she replied. "Some might call his pursuits obsessive, but I prefer to think of them as thorough." "And what of your own interests, Miss Grimm? Do you share your father's fascination with the boundaries of life and death?" She was silent for a long moment, her violet eyes studying his face in the flickering lamplight. "I have a more personal relationship with such matters, Dr. Blackthorne. Perhaps, in time, you will understand what I mean." With that cryptic statement, she bid him good night and vanished into the shadows, leaving Edmund alone with his thoughts and a growing sense that he had entered a world far stranger than he had anticipated. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Collection. Edmund's first week at Raven's Hollow Manor passed in a blur of scholarly excitement and growing unease. The library contained treasures beyond his wildest expectations: anatomical texts by forgotten masters, surgical treatises that described procedures centuries ahead of their time, and philosophical works that explored the nature of life itself with a depth that made contemporary medical journals seem primitive by comparison. Yet the more he read, the more questions arose. Many of the texts seemed to originate from a single source, a mysterious figure known only as the physician, who had allegedly lived and worked during the Renaissance period. This individual's writings demonstrated a knowledge of human anatomy and physiology that was impossibly advanced for its time, describing cellular structures and biochemical processes that should have been unknown for centuries. Edmund found himself spending long hours in the library, often reading by candlelight well into the early morning hours. Lilith would occasionally appear, moving through the stacks like a beautiful ghost, and they would discuss the philosophical implications of the texts he was studying. Her insights were remarkably sophisticated, displaying a depth of understanding that suggested formal education in both medicine and philosophy. "Tell me, Dr. Blackthorne," she said one evening as they sat in the reading alcove, rain pattering against the tall windows, "what drives your fascination with death? What personal experience has shaped your professional interests?" Edmund set down the manuscript he had been studying, a detailed analysis of decomposition rates in various environmental conditions, and considered her question. "I lost my younger brother when I was 12 years old, typhoid fever. The doctors could do nothing but watch as he wasted away, day by day, until finally," he paused, the memory still painful after all these years. "I swore then that I would dedicate my life to understanding why we die, and whether death must always have the final word." Lilith's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss. The death of a loved one leaves scars that never fully heal, does it not? We carry the weight of their absence with us always." "Indeed. And you, Miss Grimm? Have you experienced such loss?" A shadow passed across her features, and for a moment she seemed to age before his eyes, her youthful beauty replaced by something ancient and sorrowful. "I have lost everything, Dr. Blackthorne. Everyone I have ever cared for has been taken from me by time and circumstance. Perhaps that is why I find your research so compelling, the possibility of reversing what seems irreversible." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cornelius, who informed Edmund that Lord Grimm wished to see him in the Tower laboratory. As they made their way through the winding corridors of the manor, Edmund noticed that they were climbing higher than he had been before, ascending narrow stone steps that seemed to spiral endlessly upward. The Tower laboratory was a circular chamber at the very top of the manor's highest spire. The walls were lined with glass-fronted cabinets containing specimens preserved in various solutions, while workbenches were arranged around the perimeter, each equipped with brass microscopes and other scientific instruments. At the center of the room stood a table that appeared to be designed for medical procedures, its surface stained with substances that Edmund preferred not to identify. But it was the collection of portraits that truly captured his attention. Unlike the formal family paintings that adorned the lower floors of the manor, these were studies in morbid artistry. Each canvas depicted a different individual, but all shared certain characteristics. Pale skin with an almost luminescent quality, eyes that seemed to follow the observer, and expressions that suggested the subjects had been painted while in the grip of some profound suffering. "Magnificent, are they not?" Lord Grimm said, noticing Edmund's fascination with the portraits. "Each one represents a subject who contributed to our understanding of the mysteries of life and death. They were painted by an ancestor of mine, Lord Marius Grimm, who possessed both artistic skill and scientific curiosity." Edmund moved closer to examine the paintings in detail. The technique was extraordinary. The subjects seemed almost alive, as if they might step from their frames at any moment. But there was something deeply unsettling about their expressions, a quality of desperation or terror that spoke of experiences beyond normal human understanding. "When were these painted?" Edmund asked, noting that despite their apparent age, the colors remained remarkably vibrant. "The 17th century, for the most part. Lord Marius was particularly active during the plague years, when subjects were readily available." Lord Grimm's voice carried a note of pride that made Edmund uncomfortable. "But enough about family history. I have something far more interesting to show you." He led Edmund to a cabinet that had been hidden behind a heavy curtain. When the fabric was drawn aside, Edmund gasped at what he saw within. The case contained what appeared to be a perfectly preserved human heart, suspended in a clear solution that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As he watched, transfixed, the organ began to beat with a slow, steady rhythm. "Impossible," Edmund breathed. "The preservation is remarkable, but cardiac tissue cannot function without neural stimulation and blood supply. How is this possible?" Lord Grimm smiled, revealing those unnaturally sharp teeth. "This heart has been beating for over 200 years, Doctor. It belonged to a young woman who participated in one of Lord Marius's experiments. Through techniques described in the ancient texts, he was able to preserve not merely the tissue, but the vital essence itself." Edmund stared at the beating heart, his scientific mind struggling to accept what his eyes were seeing. The implications are staggering. If vital functions can be preserved indefinitely, then the barriers between life and death become meaningless. The applications for medical science are indeed revolutionary, Lord Grimm agreed. But as you can imagine, such knowledge must be carefully guarded. The world is not ready for these truths. Religious authorities would declare it blasphemy, while medical establishments would reject anything that challenges their limited understanding. What exactly are you proposing, Lord Grimm? I am offering you the opportunity to continue the work that my ancestors began, to push beyond the boundaries of conventional medicine and explore the true mysteries of existence. The knowledge is here, Doctor. Centuries of accumulated wisdom waiting to be applied by someone with your skills and vision. Edmund felt the pull of temptation, stronger than anything he had experienced during his previous research. The possibility of unlocking the secrets of life and death, of achieving the dream that had driven him since childhood, was almost overwhelming. Yet something in Lord Grimm's manner suggested that such knowledge would come at a price. "I would need to understand more about the methods involved," he said carefully. "The ethical implications must be considered." "Ethics?" Lord Grimm laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Dr. Blackthorne, you were driven from London precisely because conventional ethics would have prevented your most important work. Here, you have the freedom to pursue truth without the constraints of small-minded moral considerations." That night, Edmund lay awake in his chambers, staring at the ceiling while his mind churned with possibilities and doubts. The beating heart haunted his thoughts, a biological impossibility that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of life. If Lord Grimm possessed such knowledge, what else might be hidden within the walls of Ravenshollow Manor? His contemplation was interrupted by a soft sound from the corridor outside his room, footsteps moving with careful stealth. Rising from his bed, he crept to the door and listened. The footsteps paused directly outside, and he heard the soft whisper of his name. Opening the door, he found Lilith standing in the hallway, dressed in a white nightgown that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her violet eyes held an urgency that immediately alarmed him. "Dr. Blackthorne, I must speak with you," she whispered. "But not here, the walls have ears in this place. Meet me in the library in 10 minutes, and please, be careful not to wake my father." She vanished into the shadows before he could respond, leaving Edmund with a growing sense of foreboding. After dressing quickly, he made his way through the darkened corridors to the library, guided only by the pale moonlight that filtered through the tall windows. The manor seemed different at night, more alive somehow, filled with subtle sounds and movements that might have been tricks of his imagination. He found Lilith standing before one of the tall windows, silhouetted against the storm-lashed landscape beyond. Rain continued to beat against the glass, and lightning occasionally illuminated the grounds in stark, dramatic relief. When she turned to face him, he was struck again by her ethereal beauty, though something in her expression suggested deep inner turmoil. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to warn you about my father's true intentions, about the nature of the experiments he wishes you to conduct." "What do you mean?" Edmund asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Lilith moved closer, her violet eyes reflecting the lightning that flickered outside. The knowledge that my family has accumulated over the centuries, it was not gained through mere scholarly research. The subjects in those portraits, the specimens in the laboratory, they were not willing participants in scientific inquiry. Edmund felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Are you saying that your ancestors murdered people for the sake of their experiments? Murder is perhaps too simple a term, she replied, her voice heavy with sorrow. They preserved their subjects in states between life and death, maintaining consciousness while the body underwent various modifications. The goal was to understand the exact moment of transition, to map the boundary between the living and the dead. The implications of her words hit Edmund like a physical blow. The beating heart in the laboratory belonged to a woman named Catherine Ashford, who came to the manor seeking employment as a governess. She has been conscious and suffering for over 2 centuries, trapped in a state that is neither life nor death. Lilith's voice broke slightly. She was not the first, nor the last. Edmund sank into one of the leather reading chairs, his mind reeling. But surely your father doesn't intend. He intends to use your skills and knowledge to perfect the process, Lilith interrupted, to create a method of preserving not just individual organs but entire subjects. He believes that by studying the transition between life and death in conscious subjects, he can achieve true immortality. Immortality? Edmund laughed bitterly. The man is mad. Even if such a thing were possible, the moral cost. You do not understand, Lilith said urgently. My father has already achieved a form of immortality, as have others in our family line. We are not entirely human, Dr. Blackthorne. We are the products of centuries of experimentation, sustained by methods that defy natural law. Edmund stared at her, searching her face for some sign that this was an elaborate jest. But her expression was deadly serious, and as he looked more closely, he began to notice details that he had previously overlooked. Her skin was indeed unnaturally pale and seemed to possess an inner luminescence. Her violet eyes held depths that seemed almost infinite, and now that he focused on it, he realized that he had never seen her eat or drink anything during their conversations. What are you saying? He whispered. I am saying that I am over 300 years old, Dr. Blackthorne. I was transformed by my ancestor, Lord Marius, using the same techniques that preserved Catherine's heart. I have existed in this state for centuries, watching as my father continued the family tradition of experimentation on unwilling subjects. The revelation struck Edmund like a physical blow. Everything he had believed about Lilith, about the manor, about the nature of Lord Grimm's research, suddenly took on a different and far more sinister meaning. If this is true, then why are you warning me? Why not simply let your father proceed with his plans? Tears began to flow down Lilith's pale cheeks, tears that seemed to glow with the same inner light as her skin. Because I have grown weary of the suffering, of the endless cycle of victims who come to this place seeking knowledge or shelter, only to become subjects in my father's experiments. And because, she paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, because I have come to care for you, Edmund, in a way that I have not cared for anyone in centuries. The use of his given name sent a shock through Edmund's system. Despite the horrific revelations she had just shared, he found himself moved by her obvious distress. Lilith, if what you say is true, then we must find a way to stop him. The authorities must be notified. No, she said sharply. You do not understand the extent of his power, the connections he has cultivated over the centuries. Lord Aldrich Grimm has resources at his disposal that extend far beyond this manor. If you attempt to oppose him directly, you will simply become another subject in his collection. Then what do you propose? Lilith was silent for a long moment, staring out at the storm-ravaged landscape. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a determination that had not been there before. There is a way to end this, but it requires both courage and sacrifice. The source of our unnatural existence lies in a ritual that must be performed during specific astronomical conditions. Those conditions will occur again in 3 days' time, the night of the new moon, when certain celestial alignments provide the power necessary for the transformation. A ritual? Edmund's scientific mind recoiled from the supernatural implications. Surely you're speaking metaphorically. I am speaking of procedures that operate according to laws that modern science has not yet discovered, Lilith corrected. The ancient texts that my father showed you contain instructions for manipulating what they call the vital essence, the fundamental force that animates all living beings. By understanding and controlling this essence, one can achieve states that transcend ordinary mortality. Edmund struggled to process what she was telling him. His rational mind demanded that he reject such claims as impossible, yet the evidence of his own eyes, the beating heart, Lilith's unnatural preservation, the very atmosphere of the manor itself, suggested that forces beyond his understanding were indeed at work. Assuming that what you say is true, he said slowly, what exactly do you propose we do? The ritual requires 3 elements: a source of vital essence, astronomical alignment, and the willing participation of both subject and practitioner. If we can disrupt any one of these elements during the new moon ceremony, we may be able to break the cycle and prevent my father from creating more subjects like myself. And what of your own condition? Would such disruption destroy me? Lilith finished. Yes, Edmund. Ending the family curse would mean ending my own unnatural existence. After 3 centuries of this shadowy half-life, I welcome the prospect of true rest. Edmund found himself faced with a choice that challenged every principle he had held dear. As a physician, he had sworn to preserve life, yet Lilith was asking him to help her achieve what could only be called suicide. As a scientist, he was curious about the mechanisms that sustained her existence, yet she was describing phenomena that defied rational explanation. And as a man, he was beginning to realize that his feelings for her had grown far beyond mere intellectual attraction. There must be another way, he said desperately. If the process can create unnatural life, surely it can be modified to restore natural life. We could find a means of returning you to true humanity without destroying you entirely. Lilith smiled sadly, reaching out to touch his face with fingers that were surprisingly warm despite their pale appearance. Dear Edmund, even if such a thing were possible, what kind of life could I have? I have no existence outside this manor, no identity beyond my role in my father's experiments. The world I once knew is centuries dead, and I am as much a relic as the texts in this library. Before Edmund could respond, they heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Lilith's expression immediately became one of alarm, and she pressed a finger to her lips for silence. The footsteps paused outside the library door, and Edmund heard the soft sound of the handle being tested. Lilith, my dear, are you in there? Lord Grimm's voice carried a note of suspicion that made Edmund's blood run cold. I thought I heard voices. I am here, father, Lilith replied, her voice perfectly controlled. I could not sleep and came to read. Dr. Blackthorne has just arrived. He also seemed to be suffering from insomnia. The door opened, and Lord Grimm entered, fully dressed despite the late hour. His violet eyes swept the room, taking in every detail of the scene before him. Edmund forced himself to remain calm, though he was acutely aware that his nightclothes and disheveled appearance might suggest clandestine activity. Insomnia can be a troubling condition, Lord Grimm said, his tone carefully neutral. Perhaps, Dr. Blackthorne, you would benefit from one of my own remedies, a tisane made from herbs grown in our gardens. Cornelius will prepare it for you. That is very kind, Edmund replied, though I fear my sleeplessness is due more to intellectual excitement than physical discomfort. The texts in your collection have given me much to contemplate. Indeed, and what specifically has captured your interest so completely? Edmund chose his words carefully, aware that his answer might determine whether Lord Grimm's suspicions were aroused or allayed. The writings of the physician are remarkable in their sophistication. The anatomical knowledge demonstrated exceeds anything in contemporary medical literature. I find myself wondering about the identity of this mysterious figure and the methods by which such knowledge was obtained. Lord Grimm's expression relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained watchful. The physician was indeed a remarkable individual, one of my own ancestors, as it happens. His methods were unconventional by the standards of his time, but his results speak for themselves. Perhaps tomorrow evening we might discuss his work in greater detail. I believe you will find his approach to the study of vital essence particularly illuminating. With that, he wished them both good night and departed, leaving Edmund and Lilith alone once more. But the moment of intimacy had been broken, and both of them were acutely aware that Lord Grimm's suspicions had been aroused. Whatever plan they might devise would have to be executed with extreme caution. "We have little time," Lilith whispered once they were certain her father had truly departed. "The new moon is only 3 days away, and he will be preparing for the ritual. Once it begins, there will be no opportunity to interfere." "Tell me exactly what this ritual entails," Edmund said. "If I am to help you, I must understand precisely what we are attempting to prevent." Lilith's explanation of the coming ceremony chilled Edmund to the bone. According to her account, Lord Grimm intended to use the astronomical alignment to perform the transformation on multiple subjects simultaneously, a process that would require a source of concentrated vital essence obtained through methods that Edmund preferred not to contemplate. The ultimate goal was to create a new generation of immortal beings who would serve as both subjects and assistants in future experiments. "And I am to be the chief practitioner," Edmund realized with growing horror. "He intends to use my medical knowledge to perfect the process." "Yes, your skills in anatomy and surgery, combined with the knowledge contained in the ancient texts, would allow him to achieve results that have eluded previous generations of my family. You would be creating a race of beings like myself, conscious, immortal, and eternally trapped in a state between life and death." The weight of responsibility settled on Edmund's shoulders like a physical burden. He thought of his brother's death, of his own quest to defeat mortality, and realized that he was being offered the very knowledge he had always sought, but at a price that made the achievement meaningless. "What do you need me to do?" he asked finally. Lilith's smile was radiant despite the sadness in her eyes. "Tomorrow night, during the preparation phase of the ritual, we must destroy the source of vital essence that my father has been accumulating. Without it, the ceremony cannot proceed, and the cycle will be broken." "But Edmund," she grasped his hands in hers, her touch sending warmth through his entire body. "You must understand that once we begin this course, there will be no turning back. My father will not forgive betrayal, and the knowledge you might have gained here will be lost forever." Edmund looked into her violet eyes, eyes that had witnessed 3 centuries of suffering and sorrow, and felt his decision crystallize. Whatever the personal cost, he could not allow Lord Grimm's monstrous experiments to continue. "Then we had better make certain we succeed," he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Tell me what must be done." Chapter 3: The Ritual of Transformation. The following day passed with agonizing slowness. Edmund maintained a facade of scholarly enthusiasm, spending hours in the library examining the texts that Lord Grimm had made available to him, while inwardly his mind raced with plans and contingencies. The ancient manuscripts contained detailed descriptions of procedures that challenged every principle of medical science, yet the evidence of their effectiveness surrounded him in the preserved specimens and impossible artifacts throughout the manor. Lord Grimm appeared to be in excellent spirits, speaking with obvious excitement about the coming evening's work. "Tonight, Dr. Blackthorne, you will witness transformations that will revolutionize your understanding of life itself. The subjects are already prepared and awaiting our attention." "Subjects?" Edmund asked, though he dreaded the answer. "3 individuals who have come to us seeking various forms of assistance. A consumptive young woman hoping for a cure, a wounded soldier who wishes to restore his damaged limbs, and a scholar much like yourself who desires access to forbidden knowledge. They have all consented to participate in experimental procedures, though I suspect their understanding of what such participation entails is limited." Edmund felt his stomach turn. "My lord, surely proper medical ethics require full disclosure of risks and procedures." "Medical ethics?" Lord Grimm's laugh was sharp and cold. "Doctor, we are venturing beyond the realm of conventional medicine entirely. These subjects will achieve a form of immortality that generations of philosophers and alchemists could only dream of. What greater gift could we offer them?" The remainder of the day crawled by with Edmund playing his role as the eager researcher while internally preparing for the evening's confrontation. He memorized the layout of the tower laboratory, noted the locations of the various specimens and apparatus, and tried to steel himself for what he knew would be a battle not just for his own soul, but for the very future of human dignity. As sunset approached, Lilith appeared in the library, her pale beauty seeming to glow with ethereal light. She wore a gown of deep purple silk that complemented her violet eyes, and her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. To any casual observer, she appeared to be a young woman dressed for an important social occasion. Only Edmund could see the profound sadness that haunted her features. "The time approaches," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "My father will summon you to the laboratory within the hour. Remember, the source of vital essence is contained in a crystalline vessel positioned at the center of the ritual circle. If we can shatter that vessel during the ceremony, the accumulated power will dissipate harmlessly." "And the subjects? What of the 3 individuals who have been deceived into participating?" "They are already under the influence of a sedative compound that will render them unconscious throughout the procedure. If we succeed in disrupting the ritual, they will awaken with no memory of their experience here. My father has used such methods before to protect his secrets." Edmund nodded, though the thought of the 3 innocent victims lying helpless in the laboratory filled him with rage. "What of your father's reaction when he realizes we have betrayed him?" Lilith's expression grew grim. "Lord Aldrich Grimm has survived for centuries by eliminating threats to his work. He will not hesitate to destroy us both if he perceives us as obstacles to his goals. We must be prepared for violence, Edmund. Despite his scholarly demeanor, my father is capable of acts that would horrify even the most hardened criminal." As if summoned by their conversation, Cornelius appeared in the doorway, his gaunt features impassive. "Dr. Blackthorne, Lord Grimm requests your presence in the tower laboratory. The ceremony is about to begin." Edmund rose from his chair, acutely aware that he might be walking to his death. But as he looked at Lilith's face, beautiful, ancient, and filled with desperate hope, he knew that he had no choice but to see their plan through to its conclusion. The tower laboratory had been transformed since Edmund's previous visit. The scientific instruments and specimen cases had been moved aside to make room for an elaborate ritual circle inscribed with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. At the cardinal points of the circle stood for braziers filled with burning incense that filled the air with sweet, cloying smoke. Candles had been arranged throughout the chamber, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. At the center of the circle sat the crystalline vessel that Lilith had described, a sphere of clear crystal about the size of a man's head, filled with a luminous liquid that swirled and eddied as if alive. The light emanating from the sphere cast rainbow patterns on the surrounding floor, creating an effect that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. The 3 subjects lay on tables positioned around the perimeter of the circle. Edmund could see that they were indeed unconscious, their breathing slow and regular. The young woman appeared to be in the final stages of consumption, her wasted frame barely stirring beneath the white sheet that covered her. The soldier bore visible wounds on his face and hands, while one leg was clearly damaged beyond normal repair. The scholar was a middle-aged man whose features suggested intelligence and curiosity, qualities that would soon be perverted in ways he could never have imagined. Lord Grimm stood beside the central altar, dressed in a black robe decorated with silver symbols that matched those inscribed on the floor. His violet eyes gleamed with anticipation, and his sharp teeth were clearly visible as he smiled in greeting. "Ah, Dr. Blackthorne, excellent timing. We are about to begin the most significant experiment in the history of human knowledge. You will serve as my assistant, helping to guide the transformation process using your medical expertise." Edmund forced himself to appear eager despite the horror he felt. "I am honored by your confidence, my lord. How exactly do you wish me to proceed?" The ritual requires precise timing and careful monitoring of each subject's vital signs. As the transformation begins, you will need to use your surgical skills to make specific incisions that will allow the vital essence to penetrate their bodies more effectively. The process is delicate, Too little essence and the transformation will be incomplete. Too much and the subject's consciousness may be overwhelmed. The casual way in which Lord Grimm discussed cutting into living human beings made Edmund's skin crawl, but he nodded as if the procedure were perfectly reasonable. I understand. What instruments will I need? Lord Grimm gestured to a table laden with surgical knives, bone saws, and other instruments that Edmund recognized from his own medical practice. The sight of familiar tools being prepared for such monstrous purposes filled him with a rage that he struggled to conceal. Lilith, my dear, please take your position, Lord Grimm commanded. Your role in tonight's ceremony is crucial. Edmund watched in horror as Lilith moved to stand beside one of the braziers. Her purpose in the ritual suddenly became clear. As one who had already undergone the transformation, she would serve as a conduit for the vital essence, helping to guide its flow into the new subjects. The realization that she was being forced to participate in creating more beings like herself added another layer of tragedy to the already nightmarish situation. Lord Grimm began to chant in a language that Edmund did not recognize, though the words seemed to resonate with power that made the air itself vibrate. The liquid in the crystal sphere began to glow more brightly, and Edmund could swear he heard faint whispers emanating from within its depths. As the chanting continued, the three subjects began to stir despite their sedated state. The young woman's breathing became more labored, while the soldier's wounds began to emit a faint phosphorescent glow. The scholar's eyes fluttered open, revealing an expression of confused terror as he struggled against the paralysis induced by the drugs. Now, Dr. Blackthorne, Lord Grimm commanded without breaking his chant. Begin with the woman. The incision should be made precisely over the heart, deep enough to penetrate the chest cavity but not so deep as to damage the organ itself. Edmund picked up one of the surgical knives, his hand trembling slightly as he approached the consumptive woman's table. She looked so young and fragile, her pale skin stretched tight over prominent bones, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. In her current condition, she would likely die within weeks, but that gave him no right to subject her to the horror that Lord Grimm intended. As he raised the knife, Edmund caught sight of Lilith across the circle. Her violet eyes met his, and he saw her give an almost imperceptible nod. The time had come to act. Instead of making the prescribed incision, Edmund suddenly pivoted and hurled the surgical knife with all his strength at the crystal sphere. The blade struck the vessel dead center, and for a moment time seemed suspended as hairline cracks spread across its surface. Then the sphere exploded. The release of vital essence was like nothing Edmund had ever experienced. Light erupted from the shattered crystal with the intensity of captured lightning, while a sound like the screaming of 1,000 voices filled the laboratory. The force of the explosion knocked everyone to the floor, extinguishing the candles and braziers and plunging the chamber into a darkness illuminated only by the swirling remnants of released energy. Lord Grimm's roar of rage was audible even above the supernatural cacophony. Betrayal! You have destroyed centuries of accumulated power. In the chaos that followed, Edmund struggled to his feet and looked around for Lilith. He found her near the laboratory's entrance, her form seeming to flicker and fade as if she were becoming translucent. The destruction of the vital essence reservoir was already affecting her unnatural existence. Edmund! She called, her voice weak but urgent. The subjects. You must get them out of here before my father recovers. Edmund rushed to the nearest table, where the young woman lay unconscious but apparently unharmed by the mystical explosion. As he lifted her in his arms, he was amazed by how light she felt, as if the consumption had already begun to rob her body of substance. Behind him, he could hear Lord Grimm climbing to his feet, muttering what sounded like curses in multiple languages. Lilith, we must leave together, Edmund called as he carried the woman toward the laboratory entrance. No, she replied, her form continuing to fade. I cannot leave this place. I am too deeply bound to the manor and its dark history. But you can save them, Edmund. You can ensure that my father's experiments end with me. Lord Grimm's voice rose to a howl of fury. You have doomed them all, Blackthorne. Without the vital essence to sustain the transformation, they will die in agony as their bodies reject the partial change. And as for you, You will take their place as subjects in my next experiment." Edmund looked back to see Lord Grim advancing toward him, no longer bothering to maintain his civilized facade. The man's features had become bestial, his canine teeth extending into actual fangs, while his violet eyes glowed with their own inner fire. His fingernails had lengthened into claws, and his movements possessed an inhuman grace that spoke of supernatural enhancement. "Run!" Lilith screamed, throwing herself between Edmund and her father. "I will hold him as long as I can." What followed was a battle that Edmund's rational mind could barely process. Despite her ethereal appearance, Lilith proved to possess strength that matched her father's enhanced abilities. They grappled in the center of the ruined ritual circle, their forms moving with impossible speed as they fought for control of the situation. Edmund used the distraction to carry the consumptive woman from the laboratory, then returned for the wounded soldier. The man was heavier and more difficult to manage, but Edmund's medical training had given him the strength needed to handle unconscious patients. As he struggled down the narrow tower stairs, he could hear the sounds of supernatural combat echoing from above. Crashes, inhuman shrieks, and the splintering of wood and stone. By the time he returned for the scholar, the sounds of battle had ceased. An ominous silence had settled over the tower, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder as the storm outside intensified. Edmund found the middle-aged man conscious but paralyzed, his eyes wide with terror at what he had witnessed. "Can you speak?" Edmund asked quietly. The scholar managed a weak nod. What was that? What were they?" "Things that should not exist," Edmund replied grimly. "But don't worry, I'm getting you out of here." As he helped the paralyzed man from the laboratory, Edmund saw no sign of either Lilith or Lord Grim. The ritual circle was completely destroyed, its inscribed symbols obliterated by the explosion of vital essence, during which Edmund had ample time to contemplate the extraordinary events at Ravenshollow Manor. His 3 rescued companions recovered gradually from their ordeal. The consumptive woman's breathing improved dramatically, the soldier's wounds showed signs of accelerated healing, and the scholar regained full mobility within hours of leaving the manor's grounds. Most remarkably, none of them retained clear memories of the ritual itself. They recalled arriving at the manor seeking help with their various afflictions, but the events in the tower laboratory seemed to have been erased from their minds. Edmund suspected this was another effect of Lord Grim's supernatural preparations, a safeguard designed to protect his secrets even if the experiments failed. The young woman, who gave her name as Margaret Ashford, claimed to be the great-niece of a Catherine Ashford who had disappeared decades earlier while seeking employment in the countryside. The connection to the name Lilith had mentioned, the woman whose heart still beat in Lord Grim's laboratory, sent chills through Edmund's soul, but he chose not to share this information with Margaret. Some knowledge was too terrible to bear. Upon reaching London, Edmund arranged for proper medical care for his companions and helped them re-establish their lives. Margaret's consumption showed no signs of returning, the soldier's wounds healed completely without scarring, and the scholar returned to his research with no apparent ill effects. Whatever partial transformation they had undergone seemed to have strengthened rather than harmed them, though Edmund remained watchful for any signs of supernatural influence. For himself, Edmund faced the task of rebuilding a life that had been shattered twice, first by the scandal that had driven him from medical practice, and now by knowledge that challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. The rational part of his mind insisted that the events at Ravenshollow could be explained through natural means, hallucinations induced by drugs, mass hysteria, or elaborate theatrical deception. Yet the evidence of his own senses, and the miraculous recoveries of his 3 companions, made such explanations increasingly difficult to maintain. Weeks passed, then months. Edmund found lodgings in a modest part of the city and attempted to return to his research, but his heart was no longer in the work. The pursuit of medical knowledge seemed hollow after witnessing the horrors that such knowledge could enable. He found himself haunted by memories of Lilith, her ethereal beauty, her tragic wisdom, and the sacrifice she had made to prevent her father's monstrous experiments from continuing. It was during the autumn following his return to London that Edmund received an unexpected visitor. He was sitting in his small study, attempting to write a medical paper on tissue regeneration, when his landlady announced that a gentleman caller wished to see him. Edmund descended to the parlor expecting to find a potential patient or perhaps a colleague from his former practice. Instead, he found Cornelius. The gaunt butler appeared unchanged by the months that had passed. Still pale, still angular, still possessed of those deep-set eyes that seemed to hold dark secrets. He was dressed in the same black livery Edmund remembered, though his clothes showed signs of travel and wear. "Dr. Blackthorne," Cornelius said, inclining his head in a slight bow, "I hope you will forgive this unexpected intrusion. I bring word from Ravenshollow Manor." Edmund felt his blood turn to ice. "Lord Grimm is alive? Lord Grimm is—" "No longer a concern," Cornelius replied carefully. "The events of that night resulted in changes that even he did not anticipate. But I have not come to discuss my former master's fate. I bring a message from Miss Lilith." "Lilith?" Edmund's heart leaped with sudden hope. "She survived." Cornelius's expression remained carefully neutral. "Miss Lilith exists, though in what state I cannot say with certainty. She has asked me to deliver this to you." He withdrew from his coat a sealed letter written on paper that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Edmund's name was written on the envelope in a flowing script that he recognized immediately. His hands trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the message within. "My dearest Edmund, if you are reading this, then Cornelius has succeeded in locating you, and you have survived the months since our parting. I pray that you have found some measure of peace after the horrors you witnessed at Ravenshollow. I write to inform you that our plan succeeded beyond our most optimistic hopes. The destruction of the vital essence reservoir not only prevented my father's ritual, but also severed the supernatural bonds that had sustained our family's unnatural existence for centuries. Lord Aldrich Grimm was consumed by the very forces he had sought to control, and the manor itself has been cleansed of the dark influences that plagued it for so long. As for myself, I find that I am changed but not destroyed. The breaking of the family curse has freed me from the state between life and death that had trapped me for 300 years, but I have not simply returned to mortality. Instead, I exist now as something entirely new, neither fully alive nor truly dead, but possessed of awareness and agency that I had lost during my cursed existence. I write this letter from the ruins of Ravenshollow, which I am in the process of rebuilding according to more wholesome principles. The knowledge contained in our library remains, but it will be used henceforth for healing rather than harm. The specimens and artifacts of my father's experiments have been destroyed or laid to rest, and the victims of previous centuries have finally been granted the peace they deserved. I know that you have suffered much for my sake, and I do not ask for forgiveness for the deception I practiced during our acquaintance. But I would ask for understanding. The love I professed for you was genuine, though I confess I did not fully comprehend its nature at the time. You showed me that even one such as myself, corrupted by centuries of unnatural existence, was capable of redemption through the simple act of choosing compassion over selfishness. I do not expect that we shall meet again in this life, for my transformation has left me bound to Ravenshollow in ways that I cannot fully explain. But I wanted you to know that your courage and nobility have given meaning to my long existence, and that the memory of our brief time together has become the most treasured possession of my immortal soul. With all my love and gratitude, Lilith. Should you ever wish to correspond, Cornelius knows how to reach me. He has chosen to remain at Ravenshollow as caretaker of the new work we are undertaking there. Edmund read the letter 3 times before raising his eyes to meet Cornelius's gaze. The butler's expression had softened somewhat, and Edmund thought he detected a hint of genuine warmth in those dark eyes. "She is truly safe?" Edmund asked. "Miss Lilith has achieved a form of peace that eluded her for centuries," Cornelius replied. "The manor is being transformed into a sanctuary for those who seek healing from supernatural afflictions, a place where the knowledge of life and death can be used to help rather than harm. It is good work, Dr. Blackthorne. Work that honors the sacrifice you both made." Edmund folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. "And what of you, Cornelius? Are you also changed by these events?" A smile ghosted across the butler's gaunt features. "I was never quite what I appeared, Dr. Blackthorne. Like Miss Lilith, I was a victim of the Grimm family's experiments, though my transformation occurred so long ago that I had almost forgotten what it meant to be human. The breaking of the curse has returned to me choices that I had not possessed for centuries. I choose to serve Miss Lilith's new mission. They talked for another hour about the changes at Raven's Hollow and the nature of the work being undertaken there. Edmund learned that several other individuals had come seeking help with supernatural afflictions, curses, possessions, and transformations that conventional medicine could not address. Under Lilith's guidance, the ancient knowledge was being used to heal rather than to harm, offering hope to those who had been abandoned by ordinary society. As Cornelius prepared to depart, he extended an invitation that made Edmund's heart race. Miss Lilith would welcome your participation in our work, Dr. Blackthorne. Your medical knowledge, combined with your understanding of our methods, could help us save countless lives. The choice is yours, of course, but I believe you would find the work fulfilling. After Cornelius had gone, Edmund sat in his study staring at Lilith's letter and contemplating the crossroads at which he found himself. He could remain in London, attempting to rebuild a conventional medical practice while hiding the supernatural knowledge he had gained. Or he could return to Raven's Hollow and dedicate himself to work that transcended the boundaries between science and the mystical. The choice, when it came, was easier than he had expected. Epilogue: The New Covenant. From the Personal Journal of Dr. Edmund Blackthorne. Raven's Hollow Manor, Spring 1847. It has been 6 months since I returned to this place that I once fled in terror, and I find it transformed beyond all recognition. Where once there stood a Gothic monument to one man's obsession with conquering death, there now exists a sanctuary dedicated to healing and hope. The manor itself has been renovated extensively. The dark corridors have been opened to natural light. The oppressive portraits have been replaced with more uplifting artwork, and the rooms once dedicated to Lord Grimm's experiments have been converted into treatment chambers for those suffering from supernatural afflictions. Lilith oversees it all with a wisdom and compassion that speaks to her long experience with suffering. Her transformation has indeed changed her. She appears more solid now, more connected to the physical world, though she retains the ethereal beauty that first captivated me. Her violet eyes still hold depths of ancient knowledge, but they are tempered now by hope rather than despair. We work together daily, combining my medical training with her understanding of supernatural forces to develop new treatments for conditions that conventional medicine cannot address. We have successfully helped victims of lycanthropic curses, individuals possessed by malevolent spirits, and those transformed by dark magic. Each success feels like a victory not only for our patients but for the principle that knowledge should serve humanity rather than exploit it. Our relationship has evolved into something that transcends the categories of mortal romance. We are partners in work that spans the boundary between life and death, united by shared purpose and mutual respect. If there is love between us, and I believe there is, it is a love that has been purified by sacrifice and dedication to something greater than ourselves. The library remains, though its contents are now freely shared with scholars and practitioners who demonstrate worthy intentions. The ancient texts that once served Lord Grimm's selfish ambitions now provide guidance for healing work that benefits all who seek our aid. Knowledge, I have learned, is neither good nor evil in itself. Its moral character is determined entirely by the purposes to which it is applied. Cornelius has proven to be an invaluable assistant, possessing organizational skills honed by centuries of service and a compassion that had been suppressed but never entirely extinguished during his time under Lord Grimm's control. He has also revealed himself to be a scholar of considerable ability, helping to translate and interpret the more obscure texts in our collection. We have been joined by others as well, individuals who have been touched by supernatural forces and now seek to use their experiences to help others. Margaret Ashford returned to us last month, having discovered that her miraculous recovery from consumption came with the ability to sense spiritual maladies in others. The soldier, whose name proved to be Captain James Morrison, found that his accelerated healing extended to others through touch. Even the scholar, Professor William Hartwell, has contributed his expertise in ancient languages to our translation work. Together, we have created something unprecedented, a community dedicated to bridging the gap between scientific medicine and supernatural healing. We face challenges, of course. The outside world remains skeptical of our methods. Religious authorities view our work with suspicion, and we occasionally encounter individuals whose supernatural afflictions have driven them to madness or malevolence. But each person we help, each curse we break, each tormented soul we heal, reaffirms our conviction that this work is necessary and right. As I write these words, I can see Lilith through my study window, walking in the gardens that have been replanted with medicinal herbs. The twisted gargoyles that once adorned the manor's exterior have been replaced with sculptures celebrating life and healing. The very atmosphere of the place has changed, filled now with hope rather than dread. I think often of my brother, whose death first set me on the path that led to this place. I believe he would approve of what we have built here. Death remains a mystery, but it need not be an enemy. By understanding the forces that govern life and death, by using that knowledge to heal rather than to harm, we honor both the living and the departed. The work continues, and I am content to dedicate whatever years remain to me to this noble purpose. I have found my calling at last, not in conquering death but in serving life in all its forms, natural and supernatural, mortal and immortal, human and otherwise. Love, I have learned, takes many forms. The love between Lilith and myself may not follow conventional patterns, but it has grown stronger with each passing day. We are bound together not merely by romantic attraction but by shared commitment to work that transcends individual desires. In choosing to help others rather than seeking power for ourselves, we have found a form of immortality more meaningful than anything Lord Grimm ever imagined. The immortality that comes from making a positive difference in the world. The sun is setting now over Raven's Hollow Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow will bring new patience, new challenges, new opportunities to heal and to serve. I am ready for whatever comes, secure in the knowledge that I have found my place at last in this strange and wonderful world where science and magic intersect. And in the depths of the manor's renovated cellars, where Lord Grimm's most terrible experiments once took place, we have built a chapel dedicated to all those who suffered in the name of knowledge wrongly pursued. Their memory serves as our constant reminder that power without compassion is the true abomination, and that the greatest discoveries come not from conquering others but from serving them. The portrait in the tower, the one painting that survived the destruction of Lord Grimm's collection, now hangs in our main treatment room. It depicts not one of his victims but rather his daughter Lilith as she appeared on the night we first met in the library. Her violet eyes seem to watch over all who come seeking help, a reminder that redemption is possible even for those who have been touched by darkness. This is my story, and hers, and that of all who choose to transform suffering into healing, knowledge into wisdom, and fear into love. It is a story that continues with each sunrise, with each life saved, with each soul set free from supernatural bondage. And it is, perhaps, the greatest love story ever written. Not the love between two individuals alone, but the love that grows when people dedicate themselves to serving something greater than their own desires. In choosing to heal rather than harm, to give rather than take, to serve rather than rule, we have found the secret that eluded Lord Grimm and his ancestors for centuries. True immortality lies not in preserving the body but in nurturing the soul. And in that truth, Lilith and I have found both our purpose and our peace. End of journal entry. The end. The portrait in the tower, a Gothic romance of redemption and transformation, in which Dr. Edmund Blackthorne discovers that some knowledge comes at too high a price, some love transcends the boundaries of mortality, and the greatest victories are won not through conquest but through sacrifice. A tale of horror transformed into hope, of darkness overcome by light, and of two souls finding redemption in service to others.